Virtually unknown, this is a land of many seeming contradictions. From serene villages to thriving cities, from traditional farming methods, arts and crafts, to space technology and sophisticated industry. Unsurpassable in a variety of its scenic beauty, this is a land of green, generous plains and gently rolling hills, dreamy, mysterious mountains, wide-banked rivers, ancient, perfumed forests and crystalline lakes, broad seaside beaches and sun-drenched landscapes. Home of hospitable, expressive people rooted in their colorful customs and ancient culture, they cultivate highly developed fine and performing arts, literature, and science. Ancient cities and fortresses, churches, monasteries, and museums witness this land's and people's rich and dramatic history. Inhabited for nearly 7,000 years, with a capital city 1,500 years old, newly independent, this land and people are poised to take their place in the international community of nations. This is Ukraine. The newly independent Ukraine is one of the largest countries in Europe, about the size of France, and second only to that country in population. The landscapes of Ukraine are ever-changing and diverse throughout and along her borders. The north, with its marshes and forests, the seemingly boundless prairie or steppe with its fertile black soil or Chernivitsi to the east, the Crimean Mountains and Black Sea Riviera to the south, and the green rolling Carpathian Mountains in the west. Within these borders live nearly 52 million people. Hardworking and rooted in their traditions, the Ukrainians are a people with flair, expressive and colorful. They like celebrations. Village weddings still last at least 3 days. With roots still in agriculture, today Ukraine is a highly industrialized nation. Resource-rich in lumber, hydro, and coal, her industries span aircraft, such as the Antonov airplane, automobiles, laser technology, petrochemical, metallurgic, electronic, and textile. Ukraine was a major manufacturer of space technology for the former USSR. Beneath the tumult of the urban areas is a nation adjusting to new economic and political realities. Consumer goods shortages and queues are part of life, but there is a culture of queues. People meet, marry, do business, and talk politics and sports while waiting. While the villages are almost entirely Ukrainian, the cities are multicultural and multiracial. Forming just under a quarter of the population, significant Russian, Armenian, Jewish, and Central Asian populations add a cosmopolitan air and diversity to Ukrainian urban life. In 1991, Ukraine proclaimed independence and is now in the process of establishing international relations, printing money, and changing economic policies. The referendum on independence received overwhelming support of the entire population. With the independence, the trident, or trizub, an ancient Ukrainian symbol, and a blue and yellow flag have come to symbolize the once and future nation. In the referendum, over 90% of the population chose sovereign statehood. Enormous social and economic change is underway. Ukraine is now a more open society. Perhaps ironically, from the vantage point of secular societies, a sign of this openness is the revival of spiritual life. Once banned and persecuted by the state, churches are now open, and there is an increased interest in the role of divinity in moral and spiritual questions. The story of the Ukrainians is that of a people who had and lost their statehood nearly 1,000 years ago. Their struggle against the empires that incorporated them and their recovery of their independence are the two monumental dimensions of that history. Nearly a millennium ago, the present capital city, Kiev, was the center of a flourishing and wide-reaching empire. At its peak in the 11th century, Kiev was a trade and cultural hub between the Baltic and Black Seas, Europe, and Asia. Not only trade, but learning and the arts flourished. Kiev's wealth and fame attracted the steppe-dwelling Mongolian nomads of the Golden Horde. Having subdued China, the Golden Horde began moving west. When Genghis Khan's grandson Batu arrived in Kiev, he found a mighty city radiant in the glitter of its many golden domed temples. Racked by internal strife, neither the state nor the city were a match for the nomads. In 1240, after a long and bitter siege, Batu sacked Kiev. Volodymyr the Great, the ruler who brought Byzantine Christianity to Ukraine in 988, began building the glittering temples of Kiev. Under his rule, the realm was consolidated, and nearly a century of stability and prosperity began. The greatest monument to the Kievan state was built by his son Yaroslav the Wise. Not only did Yaroslav codify the laws of the nation and promote literacy, but he also began construction of the St. Sophia Cathedral. With its 19 domes or cupolas, mosaics and frescoes, to this day the cathedral is one of the most impressive architectural masterpieces of the world. Construction of the cathedral commenced sometime in the first quarter of the 11th century, 900 years ago. Yaroslav, a great lover of books, arranged that the environs of the Sophia house the first library in the Kievan state. Here, the first Ukrainian books were produced and copied. St. Sophia, while Byzantine in form, was an original adaptation of that style. In the 1740s, following renovations, the squat Byzantine domes were replaced by the characteristically Ukrainian Cossack Baroque domes, which dot the planet today. The mosaics once covered 640 square meters of the interior. Just over a third have survived. They are a testament to the refinement of the originals and a record of the skill of the artisans who designed and installed them, stone by stone. The color gradations of the stones used is immense. There are 25 tones or gradations of gold and silver alone. Even greater ranges of tonality in the more prosaic stones contribute to the fine nuances of the mosaic portraiture in the cathedral. Mosaics and frescoes combined are part of the Sophia's uniquely Ukrainian departure from Byzantine style, and along with the layout of the temple, they characterize Kievan style of sacred architecture. With his cathedral, Yaroslav left a great legacy. His rule, encouraging the arts and learning, made him much respected throughout Europe. To cement their alliances with Yaroslav, neighboring rulers sought out his daughters as brides. Yaroslav's daughters' portraits were recorded for posterity in a fresco in the Sophia Cathedral. These marriages made the kings of Norway, Hungary, and Sweden sons by marriage. When the King of France married Yaroslav's daughter Anna, he too joined the Kievan royal family. Yaroslav's remains rest in a stone sarcophagus in his cathedral. His passing marked the beginning of Ukraine's time of troubles. Nearly a century of internal conflict between members of the ruling family ended with a Mongolian invasion from the steppe frontier. As Berlin and Vienna were becoming cities, Europe's first line of defense against the Mongols fell. With Kiev's conquest in 1240, a desperate Ukrainian population shifted to the west. Churchmen fleeing the steppe frontier sought a haven on the forested hill and founded there what was to become the second largest monastery in Ukraine, Pochaiv. It has remained open since the days that its founder lived in his cell. Pochaiv remains the goal for many pilgrims. They come seeking spiritual and physical healing. Devotion centers on Pochaiv's miraculous icon, which is lowered every morning to receive supplication of the faithful. Icons such as this one are an important aspect of Eastern Christian worship. There are many legends about this icon. In one legend, the Virgin is said to have appeared above the monastery during a siege by the Tatars. In the form of the Pochaiv, or protectress, she turned away the arrows and projectiles of the besieging army and saved the Pochaiv Lavra from destruction. History is etched into the stones of western Ukraine. The ancient castle at Kremianets was one of the only forts not to fall to the Mongols in the 13th century. In the winter of 1240, the same year that Kiev fell, Khan Yuk began a 5-day siege. On the night of the 5th, the defenders poured water down the walls and mountainsides. By dawn, the mountain and castle had turned to crystal. The sun playing on the ice blinded the besiegers, and they could gain no foothold on the hill. Realizing the futility of further assault, Khan Yuk withdrew. There are many reminders of Mongol and Tartar invasions at Kremianets. In those annual raids, on average, over 3,000 Ukrainians were taken into captivity. In some raids, as many as 30,000 were taken. The Maiden's Cliffs are named after the 400 girls who tied themselves to each other with their braids and leapt to their deaths rather than be taken into slavery along with the hundreds of others, those destined for the slave markets of Turkey and the East. Near the capital of western Ukraine, Lviv, Oleskin Zamok is another reminder of the tides of history that have swept across Ukraine over the past 10 centuries. Now the fortification houses an extensive heritage collection of folk, ancient, and contemporary arts and crafts. Paintings by masters, as well as Hobelin tapestries such as those stored at the Louvre, are now among the treasures stored in the Oleskin Castle. Today, Halychina, the original home of many Ukrainians living abroad, is a peaceable land of farms and smaller charming cities such as Ternopil, situated around its picturesque lake and city square. In this region, all eyes look to Lviv. In Lviv, every wall, lamppost, and cobblestone are witnesses to dramatic history. The city, founded by Danilo, king of Halych, in 1256, is named in honor of his son, Lev. In the time of troubles, when Kiev lost its power and prestige, Ukrainian fortunes centered on Lviv. A view of Lviv from the high castle hill shows the modern city from its original fortified site. Like many medieval cities, Lviv was divided into districts for various ethnic groups who came to live there. This is still reflected in the street names: Armenian Street, Ruthenian Street, and Serbian Street. Recently reclaimed by the community, the Armenian church is a testament to the diversity of the urban population. Ukrainian cities are characterized by a live and let live polity. The cathedral was built between 1363 and 1370. Since the 1960s, it stored a collection of priceless icons owned by the Lviv Museum. In appearance and ambience, Lviv resembles its European counterparts. Many buildings date to the Italian Renaissance. The old town is a warren of twisted streets and cobblestones. The ensemble of buildings made up of the Korniak Tower, the Church of the Virgin's Dormition, and the Chapel of Three Saviors are listed in the 1,000 heritage sites of the world. the Chapel of the Boyim, another heritage treasure in Lviv. Built by a religious order, the chapel is a mark of an architectural heritage ardently preserved to this day. The heart of the city, the Ploshcha Rynok, or Market Square, where for centuries artisan met buyer and merchant. With 4 fountains and under the gaze of 4 Greco-Roman gods, the market still charms local and tourist alike. Surrounded by twisted medieval streets, it is another aspect of the distinctly Western European feel of the city. The buildings overlooking the Ploshcha Rynok have their characteristic 3 windows, all but one. One of the finest Renaissance buildings in Ukraine, it was designed by the Italian architect Barbone for the Greek-born Lviv merchant and philanthropist Konstantin Koryak in 1580. Now the home of the Lviv Historical Museum, the building has been home to nobility and monastic orders in the past. With its portico, courtyard, and decorations, the Koryak building is a fine example of the Italian Renaissance. Lviv's Opera Theater, designed by the architect of the Vienna Opera, evokes the period when the Austrians ruled here and the city was the capital of the Habsburgs' easternmost provinces. Today, the theater is a lively center for the performing arts. Ivan Fedorov established his print shop and published the Apostle and a Grammar here in 1574. The city remembers the first printed books of Ukraine with a monument marking the site of his premises. A great source of community pride in Lviv is the Rococo St. Eudas Cathedral, begun in 1745 by the architect Meretin, completed 15 years later. The cathedral has been the seat of many outstanding religious and cultural leaders, such as Major Archbishop Sheptytsky. Son of a noble family, Sheptytsky was a highly educated man, a great Ukrainian patriot, and a patron of the arts. During the Second World War, the underground railway that he established saved many Jews and Ukrainians from the Nazis. His influence on the Ukrainian Catholic confession was and remains enormous. Today, his cathedral is once again the seat of the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Just outside Lviv is Shevchenko High, an outdoor museum which brings together the vernacular and ceremonial architecture of the western Ukrainian region. Some of the finest examples of wooden architecture in Ukraine are found at Shevchenko High. Parks such as this serve an important community role throughout Ukraine. Various celebrations take place there. An old and dignified city, Lviv is also a city of the youth. The large student population of the university, as well as the many institutes and schools, adds a vitality to the city. Energetic and vibrant by day, Lviv is enchanting by night. While the older rest, the young turn from their studies to perhaps more compelling questions and pursuits. To the south and west of Lviv lie the Carpathians, a semicircle of young mountains whose western slopes make up a portion of Ukraine's European borders. Across them lies Zakarpattia, or Transcarpathia, a fertile agricultural land where vineyards, animal husbandry, as well as mineral springs enrich the local population. Uzhorod, named after the river Uzh, serpentine as she descends through the Carpathians, was once the westernmost outpost of the Kievan state, and with its fall was conquered by the Hungarians. Now a popular tourist city, it is the center of the prosperous Transcarpathian region. They say that the castle overlooking the city is haunted. Legend has it that the keeper's daughter had fallen in love with a man who subsequently found himself a besieger of her father's fort. She sent him a message, and the lovers met at a secret entrance in the castle walls. They were found out, and he was put to death. Since the law also called for the death of anyone who revealed the secret entrance, she was walled up alive. As the locals tell it, her white-robed form can be seen on the ramparts at night. The castle, with its grim history, is also a repository for the flourishing arts of the region. The iron statues at the castle are examples of the extensive iron casting that continues to be a fine art in the Transcarpathian region today. Not far to the south is Mukachevo, named after the suffering of the builders of the fortress and of the mountain on which it stands. The hill, on an otherwise flat landscape, was poured by hand, and the hundreds who died in its construction became part of the support of the fortress atop. The fortress was built by Elizabeth of Russia in order to maintain Russian imperial rule over the Ukrainians who built it. It began as a fort, and it became a prison, and it is now a museum. The road south from Mukachevo leads to the Pereval, a high point in the Carpathians that divides the flow of rivers and Transcarpathia from Huculshchina. At 2,061 meters above sea level, Mount Hoverlia broods over her long-lost lover, the river Prut. He rushes 910 kilometers to meet his brother, the river Dniester, and with him, they rush to the Black Sea. The geographical center of Europe is in the Ukrainian Carpathians. Trembita players, or trembiteri, on the Pereval. The mournful tone of these instruments, announcing births, weddings, and funerals, once provided a medium of communication connecting isolated mountain villages. Here, too, the landscape is written with history. After the fall of Kiev, the Carpathians sheltered the Ukrainians. Among the Hutsuls, some of the most ancient traditions and arts were preserved. Close to Westerners until recently, Yaremche, at 500 meters above sea level, has been an Eastern European resort for years. The invigorating Carpathian air, the roar of the clear and clean rivers, and the breathtaking falls offer many satisfactions to camper and trekker alike. The Huculshchina restaurant in Yaremche, a wonder of woodwork and design, was built by master craftsmen of the region. It embodies the essence of their crafts and the principles of the 20th century school of Hutsul architecture. The Carpathians have long been popular with tourists seeking the tranquility of the mountains and those in pursuit of the therapeutic effects of water and air. Hotels and rest sanatoria dot the countryside, such as this formerly aristocratic hunting lodge in Chernivitsi, where the 4 roofs are designed to evoke the 4 seasons, each having 12 chimneys. The ancient traditions remain strong in the Pokutya region on the eastern slopes and in the foothills of the Carpathians. In the center of Pokutya, on the river Prut, is Kolomyja. Located at the entrance of the southern Carpathians, Kolomyja is a small, charming city, like Lviv, very reminiscent of Western European cities. In the neighboring village, Veliki Kluchi, ancient Ukrainian wedding rituals are practiced by a large portion of the community. South of Pokutya is Bukovina, starting point for many Ukrainians living outside of Ukraine today. The capital of this province is Chernivitsi. Colonial history has left its architectural mark here as well. The Drunken Church earned its name from the twisted cupolas. The church was built by the former Romanian rulers of Bukovina. Not a single metal nail was used in the construction of the Cossack church. According to the Chernivitsians, this is the oldest wooden church in Ukraine. The large Armenian community in Chernivitsi built this church. The large Jewish cemetery in the city is a silent reminder of the large Jewish population that lived here. Chernivitsi remains a very international city, with various buildings testaments to the many states and empires that passed through the city. The opera theater and railway station resonate with the years that Bukovina province was also a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Formerly the palace of the Bishop of Chernivitsi, the university is the pride of the city. Contemporary school of higher learning, the buildings are a permanent reminder of the arts of the region. Patterns on the roofs copying the patterns of the weavings of the local population. Bukovina, like so much of Ukraine, has long been on the frontier, today with Romania and once with the Ottoman Empire. The Genoese built the Khotin fortress shortly after the fall of Kiev. Much fought over, it has been variously in the hands of its original builders, then the Turks, Russians, Romanians, Ukrainian Cossacks, and the Poles. In 1621, a Zaporizhian Cossack army of 40,000, led by Hetman Petro Konashevich Saidachny, broke through a force of 150,000 Turkish and Tatar troops in order to join a small garrison of Poles holding the fortress. Carrying the brunt of 26 days of fighting beneath the castle walls, the Zaporozhians broke the Ottoman offensive and siege, thus effectively ending Sultan Osman's expansion into southwestern Ukraine. Today, many films are shot at the Khotin fortress. It offers a range of very interesting locations and is one of the best preserved castles in Ukraine. Across the Dniester lies Podillia, lands long settled by Ukrainians. Kamyanets-Podilsky is an ancient city, its location marked since Greek antiquity by the Ptolemaic map and mentioned in the Armenian Chronicle. One of Ukraine's oldest and largest Armenian communities made this city its home. The Kamyanets-Podilsky fortress, situated in a bend of the Smotrich River, has long guarded access to the old city. Having fallen to the Mongols in 1240, the old wooden Kievan structure was replaced by an imposing stone fort in the 1400s. Today, one of Ukraine's most impressive citadels, it makes up a part of a museum complex. Kamyanets-Podilsky has been an important Ukrainian cultural center. Mykola Leontovich, the composer of the favorite Carol of the Bells, studied in the shadow of the castle's walls. Ukrainian history did not just leave a legacy of fortifications, but also many a legacy of love. East of Kamyanets-Podilsky is Uman, home of the serene Sofiivka, one of the most beautiful parks in Europe. Commissioned by Count Potocki in 1793, the park was a gift for his new bride, Sofia. Of Greek ancestry and stunningly beautiful, Potocki bought her from her previous husband for 2 million gold pieces. Built in 3 years, the park is also a monument to the great suffering of those who built it. Potocki's serfs were treated no better than slaves. Memories of suffering are recent here too. In 1941, Hitler set up his general staff in the park, and here he met with Mussolini. Metzel, the Belgian who designed the park, was much indebted to the local Ukrainian serf Zaremba, who taught him about Ukrainian plants and whose advice influenced the shape of the park. History is love's protest, or so it's been said. This resonates especially on Khortytsia Island, situated in the southern Dnipro River at the city of Zaporizhia. Now a wildlife preserve and museum complex, the island was once home to the Ukrainian Cossack Army and Brotherhood, or Host, as it called itself. The Cossacks were a democratic military brotherhood which ruled south-central and northeastern Ukraine for over 150 years. Today, their experience is remembered in literature, folktale, art, as well as in dances. The steps of those dances, which now enchant audiences internationally, were a form of military calisthenics and training in those bygone years. Peasants who fled from the oppression of their lords congregated in the steppe and over time evolved a military and political culture. Democratic, always highly disciplined in campaign, they elected their leaders and sometimes executed them. Symbols of their leaders' rank are preserved in the Lviv Military Museum. They were a volatile society where love of freedom came first. The Cossacks of the Zaporozhian host, as they became known, engaged in sea raids against the Ottoman Turks. Rebellion against Polish nobility was a constant feature in their way of life. In 1648, under the leadership of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, they arose against the Polish nobility who would have ruled them. Both Polish and Russian empires had to contend with the presence of the Zaporizhian host. Their chests created the first wall of defense against the marauding Tatars, who, from the early 13th century, raided the settled areas of Ukraine in search of booty and slaves. Empress Catherine's armies, with the help of the Zaporizhian host, defeated the Tatars finally in 1774. A year later, the Russian army destroyed the Cossack fortifications, and many of those free men were either pressed into the imperial army or fled. Their traditions, history, and hopes continued to live. To the south of the Zaporozhian lands, sheltered in a bay on the Black Sea, is Ukraine's largest port, Odessa. Once neither Cossack hosts nor Crimean Tatar were a threat, Imperial Russia began development of the southern steppe and the Black Sea coast. Thousands of Ukrainian families from the north and the west were relocated to build the city, often forcibly. The empire saw Odessa as a way to expand its influence on the Black Sea and consolidate its hold over the Ukrainians. In the 1790s, construction of the military port was entrusted to General Suvorov. The city developed into a commercial port and expanded and began to flourish under the humane governments of Prince Richelieu. Runaway serfs from Ukraine gravitated to Odessa, where there were many opportunities in trade and transportation. It is said throughout Ukraine that the Odessit, as the locals are called, is characterized by a unique sense of humor. There are many Ukrainian folktales, songs, and sayings about the free, enterprising ways of Odessa, the Ukrainian city with an attitude. You can buy anything in Odessa. A walk down teeming Deribasov Street is good evidence of this. Renewed interest in free enterprise goes hand in hand with tourism here. With its 10 beaches and clear Black Sea waters, Odessa draws more than the merchant marine. Tourists play a large role in the city's economy. As the opera theater indicates, Odessa is a musical city where the traditional arts coexist with a pulsating popular music scene. The city is home to one of Ukraine's largest music institutes. Once considered the most spectacular in the former Russian Empire, the opera theater continues as a flourishing art center. Another stately landmark in Odessa, the Potemkin Stairs, built by the Italian architect Buffo in the late 1830s. Some of the first shots of the 1905 revolution were fired here, and they have been immortalized on the film Battleship Potemkin by Sergei Eisenstein. Today, the stairs are a popular meeting place of Odessit, gypsy, and foreign traveler. To the southeast lies the southernmost point of Ukraine, the Crimean Peninsula, with a variety of plant and animal life that is unique and access to the beaches on the Black Sea. The Crimea is a leading resort in Ukraine. This is mainly steppe irrigated by water from the north, and is farmed and used as grazeland for large herds of sheep and cattle. Just to the south of its capital, Symfernopil, lie the gorgeous Crimean Mountains, a subtropical climate, exceptional vineyards and wines. Yalta is in the center of the diversities of the Black Sea Riviera. A fine symbol for the fascinating past of Yalta is the swallow's nest, a monument to the good life perched precariously on a cliff. The swallow's nest is a scale model of a Danube castle designed by the architect Schedel as a summer retreat for a German merchant. Always full of tourists, Yalta is also a bustling commercial port with a vital downtown scene. A popular resort, Yalta's many hotels and rest sanatoria, as well as stunning palaces, monuments, and refined parks, offer something for every taste. A bench amid the manicured gardens and breathtaking views of the Levadinsky Palace. Here, the future of post-World War II Europe was decided. At this palace, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin arrived at an understanding that shaped the face of Europe until the 90s. Today, a popular tourist destination, the palace is a monument to the pre-revolutionary imperial opulence of the Crimean coast. East of Yalta, at the Karadagh Nature Reserve, a different kind of understanding is under research. Here, at the Filia of the Ukrainian Southern Seas Research Institute, scholars are studying the mental capacity of seals and dolphins, especially their capacity for abstract thinking. The reserve was founded in 1979, but research on the unique plant, animal, and aquatic life of Crimea began here in 1907. West of Yalta, amid the lush subtropical vegetation, the Alupinsky Palace is another reminder of the past and of the many influences that have met over the years in Crimea. Built by Prince Vorontsov, each of the facades of the palace quotes a different architectural style: Arabic, Genoese, even a Scottish castle. Wild poppies and ruins remember the diversity of peoples that lived in Crimea. Variously Greeks, Romans, Macedonians, Goths, Byzantines, and the Genoese have settled along the Black Sea coast. But for the largest part of recent history, Crimea has been home to the Tatars. Their Khan's palace at Bakhchesarai stands as a reminder of those bygone years. Like the dreamy park in Uman, the palace, with its now dormant harem, the overgrown cemetery, is today an architectural monument to the passing of all things. The Fountain of Tears in a quiet corner of the palace compound. According to legend, it was built at the bequest of Kremianets, a man noted for his heart of stone. A cruel man, they say that his heart grew harder as he grew older. Then his people brought him a captive new bride for his harem, Dilare as she was called. She was in her early teens, very thin, and miserable about her captivity. Yet Kremianets immediately fell in love with the child, but she rejected his advances. He respected her lack of love for him, but when the virgin died shortly thereafter, the Khan was overcome by grief. The Khan called the builder Omar to him and commanded him to build a monument that would express his sorrow for years to come. Make a stone weep like a man's heart can weep. The child had taught the Khan that a heart can suffer, and Omar built a fountain that slowly weeps to this day. Further up the Churok Valley, whose mouth Bakhchesarai guards, the ruins of the monastery of the Dermishan and the almost inaccessible city of Chufut-Kalay, these echo similar sentiments. Both were places of refuge from the world. Chufut-Kalay, which is one of the largest cave dwellings in Crimea, was founded nearly 1,500 years ago. The city, perched on top of a plateau, was the home of the nearly extinct Karaites, who probably descended from the Khazars. When the Tartars ruled the valley, foreign rulers who had been taken prisoner by them were kept at Chufut-Kalay. On the opposite side of the valley, the monastery of the Dermishan, a monastic community which cut its homes and chapels out of the rocky cliff face. Its founders' tombs now stand at the foot of the ruins of a once thriving religious community. Some monks had themselves lowered into high and isolated caves to spend their remaining years in silence and prayer. Monasticism and the rejection of the world played a large part of Eastern spirituality in the past. The strong mystical elements in Ukrainian Christianity were forged in places such as this. If Crimea has seen the comings and goings of many nations, conquerors and colonists, the same can be said of the steppe to its north. Stone warriors, often thought to be effigies of women, dot the steppe. No one really knows who carved and erected these stone sentinels to the passing of entire peoples. Their secret remains as silent as they. Not only do the Babé, or warriors, stand in the steppe, the burial mounds of the once formidable Scythians have rendered a hoard of gold and other valuable archaeological information about them and their culture. Great lovers of gold, they carried on extensive trade with the Greek colonies that prospered on the Black Sea coast. North and east of the steppe is Kharkiv. Founded by Cossacks in the 1600s, Kharkiv was for a brief time the capital of Ukraine. Home of many universities and schools, it is Ukraine's second largest city. It has a history of the cultivation of Ukrainian church music and boasts one of Ukraine's oldest music schools, which opened 300 years ago. Choral music, both sacred and secular, is highly developed in Ukraine. To the west of Kharkiv is Poltava, the city of memories and monuments such as the one to Ivan Kotlяревский. His boisterous epic about Cossacks immortalized them in their own language. His home is now a museum. Nearly 200 years ago, modern Ukrainian became a literary language here amid much merriment and good company. Ironically, in Poltava, the Ukrainian Cossacks experienced their most crushing military defeat and the end of their independence. On a field outside Poltava, the combined armies of Ukrainian Hetman Ivan Mazepa and Charles XII of Sweden fought the Russian Imperial Army led by Tsar Peter. The battle turned out disastrous for the Allies, and they were defeated. A monument to the Swedish dead contemplates their heavy losses. In 1709, the field on Poltava's outskirts witnessed the effective end of the Cossack state and their independence. Hetman Mazepa, who led the Ukrainian rebellion, was one of the most educated and cultured men of his age. Following the Battle of Poltava, Mazepa died in exile. The integration of Ukraine into the Russian Empire was intensified. Captured Cossacks were compelled to build Peter's new capital, and many of them perished in the swamps where St. Petersburg rose. As Shevchenko, Ukraine's greatest poet, said, St. Petersburg is built on Cossack bones. Seemingly at the heart of Ukraine is Kaniv, a small community where, overlooking the Dnipro, lie the remains of Ukraine's greatest poet, Taras Hryhorovych Shevchenko. Born a serf, and having been bought his freedom, he lost it again because of his writings. Monuments to his unflinching love for his colonized and enserfed people span the length and breadth of his homeland. Even in the darkest days of Soviet persecution of Ukrainian aspirations, his silent statues were a link to the power of his language and vision, an independent homeland for his kinfolk. He had anticipated the generation of the 1990s. In monumental form, he contemplates Kiev University. Kiev, a city of over 2 million, which recently celebrated its 1500th anniversary. Kiev grew around a river, the Dnipro. It provided a natural barrier against the dangerous steppe. On this side, the frontier of a budding civilization. Nearly 1,000 years ago, it was razed, but not in the memory of its descendants. On its ruins, Kiev was rebuilt time and again. St. Andrew's Cathedral, overlooking the old commercial part of the city, was a later Baroque addition to the hill on which the city was born. A creation of the Italian architect Rastrelli, it is now one of the favorite landmarks in Kiev. The cathedral was one of the very few great architectural achievements of Kiev to survive the 20th century. Hundreds were destroyed by World War II and Stalin before and after the war. Another survivor is the Kievo-Pecherska Lavra, or Monastery of the Caves, one of the holiest shrines in the Eastern Orthodox world. Prior to Ukraine's integration into the Russian Empire, this was the site of advanced learning. The ruins of the Cathedral of the Dormition are a testament to the plan of the Red Army to blow up all the shrines of Kiev while retreating from the Germans in the early stages of the last World War. Somehow, only this cathedral was destroyed. Others, though mined, were saved by the men who were supposed to have destroyed them. The Kiev Caves Monastery, the largest and one of the most ancient shrines in the nation, at times called the Jerusalem of the Eastern European world. The monastery, founded over 1,000 years ago, is on a site of some of the longest inhabited areas in Ukraine. The monastery is named after the caves and catacombs beneath it, which, being climatically suited to mummification, serve as a mausoleum. Besides the complex of cathedrals, churches, and monasteries, the Lavra contains 73 underground tombs and 3 subterranean churches. Built in 1037 and mentioned in the Chronicle are the recently reconstructed Golden Gates. Once the military and main entrance into Kiev, now outdoor plays are staged there. The reconstruction in the 80s was dedicated to the anniversary of the city. Modern Kiev, with its teeming streets, fashions, businesses, the pursuit of sports and recreations. Sports are popular, both as spectacle and personal vocation. As for most Europe, soccer is the sport in Ukraine. At one time, the best soccer players of the USSR were assembled in the Kiev Dynamo team. Now the players of Kiev Dynamo are playing for the best teams on the continent. As Petrenko, an Odessan, illustrates, soccer is not the only sport in Ukraine. Petrenko brought home Olympic gold for figure skating. Even baseball has its enthusiasts. Sports is a serious avocation or undertaking in Ukraine. Treasures in Ukraine are not confined to the silence of museums. The pursuit of culture is also treasured. Be it ballet, the Kiev Ballet is internationally acclaimed. choral song, a form that Ukrainians pride themselves in. Instrumental music, or children's theater. Drawn by culture, tourist amenities, business opportunities, and the ease of travel, more and more travelers from the West are arriving in Ukraine. In the challenges that they face in reconstruction, the greatest treasure the Ukrainians have are their children and youth. These generations will rebuild the future. Червона Рута Festival, the festival of the red rue blossom. The biannual festival travels from city to city in Ukraine and draws people from all over the country and now increasingly from among the immigrations. Taking advantage of the glasnost and pushing the limits of the older generation's courage, the songs performed at the festival reignited the ancient idea of Ukrainian independence. Waves of brutal Soviet repression had humbled the elders, but the compelling demands of the young galvanized the nation. The festival crystallized the desire of the Ukrainian young for their freedom. Still alive to the rhythms of their past, it is a youthful new nation, one facing the new frontier of its future.